The scent of scorched pine and old grease clung to the air in the Blackwood Ridgepack's communal hall, a constant reminder of Faye's place. It was the smell of leftovers. While the others feasted, their laughter a booming, feral symphony of dominance, she sat in the cold, attached scullery, scraping burnt stew from the bottom of a cast-iron pot. The metal was still warm against her chilled fingers, a pathetic imitation of the heat she was denied. Her meal, a lump of cold bread and the remnants she'd managed to salvage, sat on a chipped wooden plate beside her. She ate slowly, methodically, making each bite last. It was a practiced ritual of invisibility. She was the silent Omega, a title that had been whispered first, then spoken, and now was branded onto her soul. In a pack that valued the roar over the whisper, the charge over the thought, her quiet nature was a disease, a genetic flaw. Blake had told her so himself, his words a clean, sharp blade to her heart. An alpha needs a Luna who roars, not one who hides, he had said, the day he'd severed their bond. The memory didn't bring tears anymore, only a dull, familiar ache in her chest, a weight that made it hard to draw a full breath. She had believed him. She still did. She was a broken thing, a burden on his glorious bloodline. Her existence had become a series of apologies. A soft shuffle of her feet so as not to disturb anyone. A lowered gaze to avoid meeting the contempt in their eyes. A silence so profound she sometimes wondered if she had a voice at all. She felt the vibrations of the pack through the stone floor, the heavy stomps, the boisterous shouts, but she was not a part of it. She was merely a ghost haunting the edges of their vibrant, powerful world. A shadow fell over her. One of the pack messengers, a young wolf eager to prove his worth, stood in the doorway. He didn't look at her, but at a space just above her head, as if addressing the grimy wall. He tossed a heavy, cream-colored envelope onto the rickety table. It landed with a soft thud that sounded like a gavel in the quiet scullery. The cardstock was thick, embossed with a silver wolf howling at a crescent moon. It was an object of such luxury, such importance, that it seemed to mock the poverty of its surroundings. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. Her name, Faye, was written in a script so elegant it felt like a foreign language. Inside, the invitation was a masterpiece of calligraphy announcing the union of Blake, future alpha of the Blackwood Ridgepack, and Brooke of the Sunstone Crest. It was a political merger, a power move, and the final nail in the coffin of Faye's former life. Tucked inside was a smaller folded note, penned in Blake's aggressive, slanted handwriting. She unfolded it, her heart a cold stone in her stomach. "I hope you'll come and see how happy I am," it read. "It's the least I can do to show there are no hard feelings for your inadequacy." Inadequacy. The word was a punch, stealing the air from her lungs. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a command performance, a ritual of humiliation designed to cement her status as a corrected mistake. He wanted her there as a living testament to his upgrade, the discarded prototype on display next to the shiny new model. A deep, resigned ache settled over her. She would go. It was her duty, her penance. She would attend the celebration of her own worthlessness and prove, once and for all, that she had accepted her place. Later that evening, under the sliver of a judgmental moon, she packed. There wasn't much to take. A threadbare wool blanket, a change of clothes that were more patch than fabric, and a small wooden wolf, its features worn smooth by years of anxious rubbing. Her father had carved it for her as a child before the pack's obsession with brute strength had soured everything gentle. It was the only object she owned that held any warmth. She wrapped it carefully in a rag and placed it in her small satchel. As she slipped out of the pack house, no one noticed. The wind was the only one to bid her farewell, a cold whisper against her cheek as she walked away from the only home she had ever known, towards what she believed was the final public execution of her spirit. The biting wind was a welcome punishment. Faye had fled to the Whisperwood, the forbidden border of the Blackwood Ridge territory, a place where the trees grew twisted and the shadows held teeth. She needed the sting of the cold on her cheeks to feel anything other than the hollow ache in her chest. Each gust that ripped through her thin tunic felt like an absolution, a physical pain to distract from the soul-deep certainty of her own inadequacy. She sank to her knees on a bed of damp moss, the crumpled invitation clutched in her hand, its sharp edges digging into her palm. Here, at the edge of everything she knew, she could finally be what they all thought her to be. Nothing. A ghost in the woods, waiting to fade. The ground trembled first, a low, rhythmic vibration that resonated up through her bones. It was not the clumsy stampede of a deer, but the coordinated, heavy tread of immense weight. A scent hit her next, carried on the wind, not just the familiar pine and wet earth, but something else, something ancient and wild like ozone after a lightning strike and the cold, clean scent of high mountain stone. She looked up, and her breath caught in her throat. They emerged from the gloom like specters, figures so large they seemed to bend the forest around them. At their center was a monster of a man, a being carved from granite and shadow. He was nearly 7 feet tall, his shoulders a bulwark against the world, his dark hair falling over a face that held the brutal beauty of a winter storm. Scars, pale and silvered, mapped the skin of his arms, but it was his eyes that held her captive, liquid silver pools that seemed to burn with a cold internal fire. He was not just an alpha, he was a force of nature, and she had trespassed into his domain. Fear, cold and absolute, seized her. This was it, the end she probably deserved for her weakness, for the crime of being born silent in a world that demanded a roar. She flinched, curling into herself, a reflexive motion honed by years of expecting blows. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the snap of bone, the tearing of flesh. She waited for the pain that would finally erase the ache. But it didn't come. The forest fell into a profound silence, a silence that was not empty, but filled with a predator's patient stillness. Slowly, she dared to open her eyes. The Lycan king, for he could be no one else, not with that aura of absolute command, had stopped a respectful distance away. His massive companions stood like stone sentinels behind him, their gazes watchful, but not immediately hostile. The king's silver eyes were fixed on her, his head tilted in a gesture not of aggression, but of intense curiosity. His gaze didn't hold the contempt she knew so well, nor the pity she despised. It held focus, as if he were seeing not a worthless omega, but a puzzle he was determined to solve. "Are you lost, little one?" His voice was a low rumble, like rocks shifting deep within the earth. It was a sound that could have shattered mountains, yet it reached her without a single sharp edge, holding no threat. Her throat was too tight to speak. She could only shake her head, a small, pathetic gesture. His gaze dropped to her clenched fist, to the corner of the cream-colored invitation peeking out. A flicker of understanding crossed his features. He didn't need to read the words. He could smell the humiliation rolling off her in waves, a scent more potent than her fear. He took a single, deliberate step forward, and she flinched again. He stopped instantly. A deep sigh escaped him, a sound of profound regret, not for his actions, but for the world that had taught her such fear. He looked from the invitation back to her face, his silver eyes seeming to pierce through the layers of shame and pain to the core of her. "They called you silent because they feared the peace you bring," he said, his voice a quiet thunder that shook her to her soul. "To a warrior, peace isn't weakness, it's home." The words struck her with the force of a physical blow, but instead of pain, they shattered something brittle inside her. The careful wall she had built around her heart cracked. No one had ever seen her silence as anything but a failing, a void where strength should be. He saw it as a gift. A tear, hot and unexpected, traced a path through the grime on her cheek. He saw it fall, and his jaw tightened, a silent vow passing over his face. "You will not weep in these woods alone," he declared, his tone shifting from gentle observation to unwavering command. "You will come with me. I offer you sanctuary in the Frostfang Peaks." Sanctuary. The word was foreign, a concept she couldn't grasp. Why would this king, this legend feared by all, offer anything to a discarded omega? Her mind screamed at her to run, that this was a trick, another form of cruelty. But her body, exhausted and broken, refused to move. He saw the conflict in her eyes. "I will not harm you," he said, and the certainty in his voice was more binding than any oath. "You are safer with me than you have ever been in your life." He turned and whistled, a low, sharp sound. From the shadows, a warhorse of impossible size appeared, its coat the color of midnight, its breath misting in the cold air. Without waiting for her answer, Damon strode to her side. He moved with a grace that defied his size. Before she could protest, he scooped her up as if she weighed nothing. For a terrifying second, she was airborne, and then she was settled gently on the massive saddle. The worn leather was cold, but the man who mounted behind her was a furnace. He wrapped a heavy, fur-lined cloak around her shoulders, pulling the hood over her head and cocooning her in warmth and the scent of pine, winter, and something that was purely him. His body was a solid wall at her back, shielding her from the wind, from the world. He took the reins, and with a soft click of his tongue, the great horse began to move, carrying her away from the only home she had ever known, towards a future she could not begin to imagine. The steady, powerful beat of his heart against her back was the only sound in her new world, a rhythm that promised not pain, but protection. The journey was a blur of motion and warmth, a dreamlike state from which Faye awoke only when the great warhorse finally slowed its pace. They passed between two colossal monoliths of black rock that served as a natural gate, and the air instantly changed. The scent of damp decay was gone, replaced by the clean, sharp aroma of high-altitude pine, the metallic tang of a blacksmith's forge, and the comforting smell of wood smoke from 100 hearths. Before them, carved into the very heart of a mountain, was a fortress of dark stone and iron. It was not beautiful in the way a castle might be. It was magnificent in its raw, unyielding strength. This was Ironhold, the seat of the Frostfang Peaks Pack. As they rode through the main courtyard, a hush fell. Warriors, giants in their own right, stopped their training. Women paused in their work, their faces turning towards their king. But their eyes, curious and intense, did not hold the familiar sting of contempt Faye had braced for. They looked at her, nestled in Damon's protective embrace, with a mixture of awe and profound respect. As Damon dismounted, his movements fluid and powerful, several Lycans bowed their heads, not in fear, but in deep, unwavering loyalty. He turned and lifted her down from the saddle, his hands spanning her waist, setting her on the ground as if she were made of spun glass. For the first time in her life, she was not invisible. She was seen, and the weight of all those gazes felt not like a judgment, but like a welcome. An older she-wolf with silver-streaked hair and eyes that held the wisdom of many winters approached them. She bowed her head to Damon before turning to Faye. "My king, she is cold." Her voice was like warm honey. Damon's silver eyes softened as he looked at Faye. "See to her, Ilara. Everything she needs." Ilara nodded and gently placed a warm, calloused hand on Faye's arm. The touch was kind, expecting nothing in return. "Come, child. Let's get you warm." Faye was led into the heart of the keep, through halls of polished stone warmed by massive, roaring fireplaces. The air was filled with the scent of roasting meat and herbs, a stark contrast to the scorched grease of her old life. She was taken to a chamber with a deep copper tub already steaming with hot water, the vapor carrying the scent of lavender and chamomile. Ilara helped her shed the thin, ragged tunic, her touch gentle and without judgment at the sight of Faye's thin frame and the faint scars that mapped her skin. Sinking into the hot water was a baptism. The heat soaked into her bones, chasing away a chill that felt years deep. It wasn't just the grime of the forest being washed away. It was the filth of Blake's words, the stain of her pack's disdain, the feeling of being perpetually less than. When she emerged, Ilara was waiting with a thick, soft towel that felt like a cloud against her skin. Laid out on the bed were new clothes, a simple tunic of the softest dark blue wool, supple leather leggings, and fur-lined boots. The fabric was a caress, a silent promise of comfort and dignity. Later, a tray was brought with a bowl of thick, hearty stew, rich with meat and vegetables, and a loaf of warm, fresh bread. Faye ate until she was full for the first time she could remember, the simple act of having enough feeling like the most profound luxury. Days melted into a quiet rhythm of peace she had never known. She was given a small room of her own, with a warm bed and a window that overlooked the snow-dusted peaks. No one demanded anything of her. She was free to wander the fortress, to sit by the fire, to simply exist. She watched the pack, her silent nature now a tool of observation, not a mark of shame. She saw warriors returning from patrol, their bodies weary but their spirits unbroken. She saw pups playing, their laughter echoing in the great hall. And she saw the quiet pain that lingered in the eyes of the veterans, the shadows of battles long past that haunted their sleep. One night, a piercing scream shattered the hall's tranquility. A small pup, no older than 5, was thrashing in his cot, caught in the grip of a nightmare. He was an orphan of a border skirmish, his parents lost months ago. Several large warriors tried to soothe him, their deep voices and gentle hands doing nothing to quell his terror. His screams were raw, filled with a grief too large for his small body. Faye felt a pull in her chest, a familiar ache that was not her own. It was the boy's pain, a tangible thing she could feel as if it were a physical current in the air. Without thinking, she moved towards him. The warriors parted, their faces etched with concern and helplessness. She knelt by the cot and, ignoring the instinct to remain invisible, placed her hand gently on the pup's sweat-damp forehead. She closed her eyes and did what she had always done in secret to soothe her own aching heart. She didn't try to block the pain. She opened herself to it, letting the boy's terror and loss flow into her. She pictured a calm, quiet forest, a place of safety and peace, and pushed that feeling out through her touch. A soft, pale light, almost imperceptible, seemed to emanate from her hand. The pup's frantic thrashing ceased. His screams subsided into whimpers, and then into soft, even breaths. He leaned into her touch, his small body relaxing completely as he fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The great hall was utterly silent. Every eye was on her, but for the first time, the stares were not filled with pity or confusion. They were filled with wonder. One of the oldest warriors, a man with a face like a weathered rock, knelt before her. "Goddess," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You are a healer." Faye looked down at her hand, then at the sleeping child, And for the first time, she understood. Her sensitivity, her silence, the very things she had been taught to hate about herself, were not a weakness. They were a gift. Later that night, Damon found her on a stone balcony, watching the moon rise over the frozen peaks. The cold air was sharp, but she was wrapped in a heavy fur cloak he had given her, the scent of him a constant, comforting presence. He stood beside her, not speaking for a long time, his presence a solid wall of warmth against the night. "I heard what you did," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. Faye didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the stars. "I didn't know I could." "I did," he said simply. He gently turned her to face him. His silver eyes searched hers, filled with a reverence that made her heart ache. With a tenderness that defied his immense size, he reached up and traced the line of a small faded scar on her cheek, a memento from a fall in her childhood that Blake had always hated, telling her to hide it with her hair. "He told you this was a flaw," Damon whispered, his thumb stroking the mark with impossible softness. "I see a map of everything you survived. You are not broken." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers, the world shrinking to the space between them. "You are whole." In that moment, something clicked into place within her soul, a deep and resonant chime that settled every fear, every doubt she had ever harbored. It was the snap of a bond, not one of obligation or politics, but of two halves of a single soul recognizing each other across a frozen wilderness. He wasn't her savior because he was a king. He was her salvation because he saw the parts of her she had been taught were worthless and called them a treasure. She looked up into his silver eyes and understood the profound difference between being an accessory to someone's ambition and being the anchor for their entire world. The day of the wedding arrived not with a sense of dread, but with the quiet calm of a coming winter storm. Faye stood before a mirror of polished silver in her chambers at Ironhold, a place that had become more of a home in a few weeks than Blackwood Ridge had been in a lifetime. She was no longer the ghost in the scullery. Dressed in a gown of deep forest green silk, so dark it was almost black, and wrapped in a heavy cloak of white wolf fur, she looked like a queen of the wild. Her hair, once dull and lifeless, now shone with health, braided with silver threads. And there, on the curve of her neck, where it met her shoulder, was Damon's mark, a swirl of silver lines that pulsed with a faint inner light. It was a brand of belonging, a declaration to the world that she was cherished. Damon entered the room, his own presence a silent thunder. He wore the black leathers of a king at war, his silver eyes taking in her transformation, not with surprise, but with a deep, possessive pride. He didn't need to ask if she was ready. He could feel her resolve through their bond, a steady, unbreakable core of steel where fear had once lived. He offered her his arm, his touch a familiar anchor. He wasn't taking her to a wedding to show her off. He was accompanying his mate as she closed the final chapter of a book she was never meant to be in. The great hall of the Blackwood Ridge Pack was just as she remembered it. Loud, crowded, and smelling of stale ale and desperation. But as she and Damon stepped through the doors, a wave of silence rolled through the room. So sudden and absolute it was, as if all the sound had been physically sucked out. Every head turned, every jaw dropped. They saw not the shuffling, invisible Omega they had discarded, but a woman of breathtaking poise and power, flanked by a monster of legend. At the makeshift altar, Blake's face went white, a stark contrast to the festive decorations. Beside him, Brooke, in her pristine white dress, suddenly looked small, her arrogance shriveling under the weight of Damon's gaze. The ceremony was a blur, a hollow ritual performed for a crowd that could no longer focus on the bride and groom. Their eyes kept darting back to the silent king and the queen at his side, the pair who had stolen the entire event without saying a word. Afterward, Blake, driven by a desperate need to reclaim some semblance of control, approached them. His swagger was gone, replaced by a nervous tremor. "Faye," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm surprised you came, and with company." His gaze flickered to Damon, a pathetic mix of fear and raw envy. Damon did not speak. He did not even deign to look at Blake. He simply kept his silver eyes on Faye, his expression one of complete adoration, as if Blake were nothing more than an annoying insect buzzing at the edge of his world. That silent dismissal was more crushing than any threat could ever be. It was Faye who answered. Her voice was not loud, but it carried through the silent hall with the clarity of a bell. "I came, Blake," she said, her tone calm and even, "not to see you happy, but to say goodbye to the girl you tried to convince me I was." He stammered, his face flushing with a shame that was years too late. "But you seem so different. I made a mistake. I didn't know what I was losing." A small, genuine smile touched Faye's lips for the first time in this place. It was a smile of pity, not for herself, but for him. You didn't lose anything, Blake, because you never truly had me. You only possessed my self-doubt. She reached up and gently touched the mate mark on her neck. And it no longer belongs to me. I haven't changed. I just found the place where my worth was always obvious. With that, she turned her back on him. She placed her hand in Damon's, and together they walked out of the hall, leaving Blake and his pack to drown in their own mediocrity, forever haunted by the ghost of the treasure they had so carelessly thrown away. Back on the high balcony of Ironhold, with the clean, cold air of the Frostfang peaks filling her lungs, Faye looked out at the endless sea of stars. She was no longer the silent Omega, a broken thing apologizing for the space she occupied. She was Faye, the healing heart of the Frostfang Peaks. She was the anchor for a king, the sanctuary for a pack of warriors. Blake had called her silence a weakness. Damon had called it peace. She finally understood. They were both wrong. Her silence had never been an absence of sound. It was a language, and she had finally found someone who was worthy of listening.